Good evening, members of Dominion, to Christmas night, midnight in the desert. As you see, tonight's interviewee is Professor Ronald Mallet. The interview will come from October 6, 2015 in time. Let's take a look and see if we have anything in the special event tonight before we do get started with the interview. Waiting for the holiday snowy pass permissions. Okay. Alright, with that being said, anything I'll need to come back to say myself, I will interrupt the interview. But until then, Mr. Bell, if you'd be so kind, take it away from the great American Southwest.
From the high desert and the great American Southwest, I bid you all good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you may be in the world's time zones. Each and every single one of them covered like a blanket by this program, Midnight in the Desert, worldwide. Great to be here with you. Two rules on our program.
Alright, well, I actually have to take a quick break just for today's Winterfest. It'll take us, we have Sebastian Twang. When my stockings came up empty, all my dreams were laid to rest. Who destroyed our festive spirit to bring down Winterfest? The archdemon ruined it all when the holidays were to begin. Shut your doors and shut your windows. Do not let that evil in. Alright, so I should have quit my day job singing. We'll get 10 of that, which makes Sebastian today's hero of the day. My apologies, Mr. Bell. You were saying?
That's all we have. Two rules. No bad language, and only one call per show. That said, let's look at a little news. We're going to talk about time travel tonight with Professor Ronald Mallet. It is my favorite topic, as you know. I love time travel. I really love time travel. The whole concept of it, I would love to travel in time myself. God, I would love that. I followed it. I think I've read everything and seen every movie that one could see about time travel. And it is intense. Let me first give you something you can go and see at artbell.com because it's just breaking news from Peru. A Peru teen has been rushed to the hospital screaming for the devil after becoming possessed. A Peruvian teenager has claimed that she became possessed by the devil after playing with a Ouija board using a mobile phone app. Patricia Cuspi from Chosica, that's in the Lima province of Peru, ended up possessed by the devil's spirits after using a mobile phone version of the board game. Now, I'm inviting you to artbell.com not just to read this with me, but to see the video of this young lady possessed. Shocking footage filmed at the local hospital shows this young lady thrashing and convulsing while screaming for her mother and shouting out at the devil, "Let her go." Friends of the teenagers say they have downloaded the app over the weekend for, a bit of fun and had joked around about trying to communicate with the spirit world. Upon returning home, her parents noticed that she seemed unwell and eventually called an ambulance when she began convulsing and foaming at the mouth. Thinking that their daughter may have eaten something or taken a drug that would cause an allergic reaction, they of course contacted her friends who told them about the Ouija board. In the video from the hospital that you can see at artbell.com, medical staff can be seen trying to restrain the young lady, who is convulsing violently and struggling as she shouts 666, followed by let me go, let me go. In another segment, she can be heard shouting, please give me my phone. And Mom, these doctors don't know what they're doing. Take me home. Ouija boards. Told you about Ouija boards, didn't I? All right, looking at the news briefly, the mother of a gunman who killed 9 people and then himself at an Oregon community college allowed her troubled son to have guns, acknowledged in online posts that he struggled with autism, but she didn't know he was potentially violent. Well, you don't always know that somebody is potentially violent, right? The top U.S. commander in Afghanistan is saying that he's recommending that President Obama change his mind and keep more than 1,000 U.S. troops in the country beyond 2016, just now days after a deadly U.S. airstrike mistakenly struck a hospital, Doctors Without Borders hospital, in fact, during fierce fighting in the north. The Doctors Without Borders people are calling it a war crime. I think the Pentagon is choosing other wording. And this from the Anomalist.com that has got to be listening to the show. Hello, guys. Nick Redfern discusses Dr. Jacobs' new book, Walking Among Us, The Alien Plan to Control Humanity. A tale not of abductions, but about how abductees are allegedly being used to assist alien human hybrids, whose role it is to infiltrate human society. So, we read stories about abductees assisting the hybrids in the real world, driving them about, feeding them, teaching them how to dress and blend in, at baseball games, Kmart, and Pizza Parlor. It's a scenario that Jacobs himself admits leads to a ridiculous conclusion, but in part 2 of his overview of the book, Redfern points out the similarities between these hybrids and Men in Black, which Redfern has studied extensively. Both, says Redfern, have a fascination for pens, are awkward around food, and often look sickly. Redfern has a good point. So, obviously, other people are putting together the very interesting coincidences between Dr. Jacobs and what he's saying and Nick Redfern. I sure did. Ding, 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 all the way, right? One more thing. The Russians are helping us to death in Syria. What the Russians are actually hitting with their airstrikes are our CIA-trained anti-Assad rebels. So the fireworks fall all over Syria. And as I mentioned, they're helping us to death. They were supposed to go in there and kill some ISIS characters for us. They didn't do that. Well, as I mentioned, it is my favorite topic of all time. So coming up, Professor Ronald L. Mallett received his BS, MS, and PhD in physics from Penn State University. He worked for United Technologies from 1973 to 5, and in 75 joined the physics faculty at the University of Connecticut in Storrs, where he is currently a research professor of physics. Professor Mallett has published numerous papers on black holes and cosmology in professional journals. His breakthrough research on time travel has been featured extensively in media around the world, and his published memoir, Time Traveler, has been translated into several languages. Award-winning filmmaker Spike Lee has written a script for a feature film of the memoir. So, coming up in a moment, Professor Ronald Mallett and Time Traveler. From the high desert, I'm Art Bell, and this is Midnight in the Desert.
As always, audio muted until we get through. So try to avoid any copyright restrictions. Apologies, last night we tried to play a clip from John Pinette after last night's Midnight in the Desert. That one, surprisingly, of all the Pinette clips we've played, that was the one that actually had a copyright claim on it. So we had to put some weird music over top instead. And now, back to Midnight in the Desert.
In their lifetime, should take a moment out in the United States, if that's where you are, or Canada, and actually go to a country where they turn back time. Yeah, they don't really turn back time, but when you get there, you feel as though it has been turned back. And so if you get the opportunity to go to a third world country, somewhere friendly, for me it was the Philippines, when you get there, it clearly feels like time has been turned back. Now, of course, that is beginning to change, and Asia, the entire Asian continent, is beginning to catch up with the rest of the world, so it's not quite as it was, but you still get that feeling that you're back in time. And time is what we're going to talk about tonight with Professor Ronald Mallet. Welcome to Midnight in the Desert, Professor.
Well, thank you very much, Art.
Great to have you, and I understand you're back in Connecticut.
That's correct.
And 3 hours ahead in time.
That's exactly right. It's 12:15 for me right now.
Actually, 12:13 and 13 seconds, Professor. You said you had a lot of clocks around you.
Yes, that is correct.
All right. So it has been so long. When did we talk last?
Quite a while ago.
You were still like a teenager, right?
Not quite. I had done my research, but it was quite a while ago. I mean, my breakthrough happened at the turn of the century, and I think that it was just not long after that you had interviewed me.
Right. Right. So let us begin at the beginning, because so many who are listening now will not have heard you. It's obviously important to ask you why you decided to get even involved with, here you are, a theoretical physicist, beginning to actually toy with the mechanics of time travel. Why did you decide to become involved in time travel?
Well, it has to do with my father. He was the center of my life, and he was bigger than life. He was a television repairman in the Bronx. I was the oldest of 4 children, and my father had served in the Second World War. He was a battlefield medic, and he used the GI Bill to go to a 2-year technical school after he got out of the service. And he was very good in his job. In fact, he was so good that he actually repaired television sets for people who were celebrities in New York at the time, like Walter Matthau. I actually have an autographed picture of Walter Matthau thanking my father for fixing his television set. And the thing is that even though he worked very hard, and sometimes 2 jobs, he had a lot of time for his family, and that was something that made him endearing to all of us. And he paid a lot of attention to me. He gave me scientific toys like gyroscopes and crystal radio sets, and he loved to read. So, of course, that I love to read. And the thing is that he looked like he was very robust and healthy, and we didn't really know, at least as children, my mother might have known, but he had a weak heart, and he died of a massive heart attack, and he was only 33 years old.
Oh my, 33. And
yeah.
And at that point, how old were you?
I was 10 years old.
Oh, God.
Yeah, and the thing is that prior to that, I had been a rather happy kid and pretty, gregarious. After that, it was like the world was destroyed for me. For me, it was like the death of Superman. And I went from being a happy kid to actually a very upset, depressed, and lonely kid. And I was just in a fog. I really didn't care whether I lived or died. And this went on for about a year. I buried myself in my books, the science fiction books in particular. And then I came across, when I was 11, I came across the book that changed my life. It was actually a classic illustrated version of H.G. Wells' classic The Time Machine. And something about just the cover of the Classics Illustrated spoke to me. And when I read the first page of it, it said, "Scientific people time is just a kind of space, and we can move forward and backward in time just as we can in space. When I said that, I thought, well, this is unbelievable. This means that it might be possible to have a machine, a time machine that could go back into the past. And my imagination immediately took flight. I said, this means that if I had this kind of a machine, I could go back and see my father again, to tell what was going to happen, maybe change things. And then that was the beginning of an obsession for me. I mean, I even went to the point of my mother had kept the old radio and television parts that my father had, and I looked at there was a picture on this Times Illustrated of their idea of what a time machine might look like, and it had hoops and everything like that. So I put old bicycle tires and everything together with this stuff, and when I plugged it in, nothing happened, and of course. But the thing is that I was disappointed, but I wasn't discouraged because I remembered that it said that scientific people know very well. So I thought maybe that meant that I had to know something about science, although at that point I didn't know exactly what I would need to know. But that would come just a little bit later on because...
All right. Let me ask you a quick question, particularly with reference to your father. As I mentioned, I have read just about everything on time travel, as I guess you have, and I've seen all the movies. And the movie that had to have affected you would have been Frequency. I'm sure you saw Frequency, right?
Yeah, as an adult, yes. I of course, and it's one of my favorite movies.
Mine too.
Because it actually speaks to the theme that's the core of my life. And so, yeah, that is one of my favorite movies. You're right.
Yeah, I knew it had to be. And even for me, the ham radio part of it was a big connection. But that brought my wife to tears. That was a very, very, very touching movie.
Oh, it was. It really was. And the thing is that in that case, he didn't have really control. I mean, except for the fact that it was communication through, the ham radio set. But the phenomenon that was causing it was, sun distortion. I mean, that was...
That was the premise, yeah. In fact, the opening scene, the northern lights were blazing.
Right. And the thing is that for me, one of the things is that, and I think that this is what differentiates a lot of science fiction movies and also science fiction books that made H.G. Wells' work so different, was the fact that he posited a device, a machine. There actually is other early time travel books. One of them is, in fact, part of it was a Connecticut person. It's called Connecticut Yankee and King August Court by Mark Twain. But there, once again, it was an accidental thing that caused it. And for me, it was the notion of control. And for me, I think that had two different levels involved with it, because death is something that seems like it's out of your control. And the fact that there might be some sort of a technical way of controlling nature, and in this particular case of controlling time, that spoke to me. And I knew that was going to have to be, I was going to try to find a way of actually finding a mechanism that might allow me to manipulate time.
Boy, it sure speaks to me too. And I wonder why so many people are so intrigued by the entire concept of time travel. If I were to answer that, I would say we are locked in this linear, non-stop progression of time, and there seems no relief from it, no escape from it. It marches forward, we march with it, and that's that. But people keep imagining being able to go forward or especially go back in time. So what's all the intrigue? Exactly that we're locked up?
No, I think all the intrigue has to do with the fact that we long to be able to go back to, and I mean, who of us has not had something that has happened in our lives, either personally or, otherwise, that we would say as a regret. If I could have done this, how would this have turned out for me in my life? If I could have prevented this.
Yes.
And Now, let me give you an example of something that when I had my breakthrough, I started getting letters and communiques from people literally all over the world. And one of them that was one of the most moving to me, which I'll share with you, it came from Germany. And this person, I learned German when I was in college, but I forgot most of it. So the thing is that when I got the package and the letter in it, I had graduate students in the department who were from Germany, and I asked one of them if they would translate it for me. But in the meantime, there were 4 pictures that had accompanied the letter. And the thing is, the pictures told a story. In the first picture, it showed a middle-aged couple with a very attractive young woman in the picture. And then in the second picture, the young woman is in sort of a cute modeling type of pose.
Right.
And then in the third picture, there's a mangled car. And in the fourth picture, she's in a coffin. Wow. And I brought tears to my eyes immediately. I mean, I had never seen anything like that. And the thing is that, so even before I got the letter, I knew what the story was going on here. And then when I got the letter back from the student, sure enough, the letter was from the father of this young woman. And he was asking me if he had heard about my work and if it was possible to send a message back to his daughter to warn her, or to warn them, to warn her about what was going to happen, to try to save her life.
Of course.
And I was heartbreaking, and I had to tell them that my research is just ongoing, and that wasn't possible. But nevertheless, it shows the core of one of the things. I mean, this is a very graphic way. I mean, I've gotten emails from people who have had a loved one murdered, and they would like to go back and prevent that.
Sure.
Or they themselves have been in prison, and they would like to go back and warn themselves about that. So I think it has to do with this very, very primal thing of wanting to try to adjust our life and we do speculate that. What if I had met this person rather than that person? Just idle things like that. Or on a more global level, people would have liked to actually see Lincoln give the Gettysburg Address. Or if that's one thing I would like to. Or I love classical music. I would love to hear and see Chopin actually performing. So I think that it's that. I think it's not. I mean, you might say that the longing is there first, and then we realize we're in prison, rather than the other way around. So I think that's the thing. And also, then even when it comes to the future, I mean, who of us hasn't wondered? We think of all the marvels that we have now, wondering about the future when we might even have things like a cure for cancer, a cure for AIDS, a cure. What's going to happen, and to see also the possibility of changing things if we know the future and sending information back to us. Sometimes people have asked me, well, what would you have a time machine for? I mean, obviously, one of the things is my father, but I said just in a more general sense. Suppose we had an early warning device. A time machine is an early warning device. Imagine if we could send information back to us to warn ourselves of catastrophes,
sure,
and hurricanes and tsunamis and earthquakes, thousands of lives that we could save. So I think that's the intriguing thing about time.
All right, let's discuss a couple of other aspects of it, and those are all really positive. And by the way, if I had my druthers, I've always said this, I would go back and observe the life of Christ. I would observe the miracles that are said to have been done by Christ, so I could really know, because as you pointed out, death is not under our control. What comes after might well be determined about the truth of what happened then.
Absolutely. No, that seeing Christ is one of the things that I would have loved to do. And, we'll come to that later about this notion of what the things that would be so exciting to see and whether it's going to be possible. Yes, seeing Christ in that time would be absolutely a wonderful thing to be able to do.
Have you you contemplated this, Professor? And that is, you mentioned going to the future. It would be wonderful. Yes, you might bring back a cure for cancer, and you might bring back information about what stocks are going to be hot. And in that regard, you would disrupt the entire economic everything.
That's essential. I mean, the thing is that time travel is a much more complex thing than we think about. I mean, in other words, the thing that you're talking about actually has a parallel in what's called the so-called grandfather paradox, which is that we travel back in time and do something that could dramatically alter the future and alter our own lives.
You've thought about this, right?
I've thought about this a lot. You know.
Right. What I gave you was sort of an opposite paradox, but it would still be disruptive incredibly to society and to economics. But maybe there'd be rules. Maybe there'd be time travel rules, Professor.
Well, I don't know about rules, but the thing is that the reason why I said potentially is because travel to the past leads to possible paradoxes, and it may not be so simple as just simply bringing back information. There might be all sorts of things that happen to the time stream that, in fact, even though you bring it back, you're not bringing it back to this dimension. I mean, that's a whole different thing. I mean, I don't know whether you want to get into that.
Well, I mean, let's take an example. Let's say you did have the ability to travel in time, and you went back and you had your dad go and see a heart specialist, and the heart attack he was going to have would be prevented. Then you would be changing something in this time stream, without a doubt. Your dad would be living on. It would be a very, very different situation indeed. Professor, we're at a break point, so relax. We'll come back. We've got so much territory to cover. Professor Ronald Mallett, a professor of theoretical physics. Professor of theoretical physics, how about that, is my guest. And God, I love this topic. I really do. We'll be back.
And again, we'll return to the show as soon as the audio bumper is complete. As we continue to grind to try to level up the character. That is our 17th, 3 more for the 6-star superstar Yasmin.
Goals. We trust you, but remember, the NSA. Well, you know, to call the show, please dial 1-952-225-5278. That's 1.
Head back to midnight in the desert.
Professor Ronald Mallett is my guest. He is indeed a professor, and that's an interesting question in itself. I mean, here he is teaching physics to college students and talking about time travel. And I wonder, Professor, how that works out for you from a professional point of view. In other words, I take it you're tenured, so probably that part's okay, but I would think there would be some critical comments that come your way every now and then from colleagues.
Well, yeah, I mean, the thing is that when I had decided way back when I was 11 that I wanted to build a time machine, even at that early age, I knew people were already concerned about me. And so I already was astute enough to realize that I probably shouldn't share the fact that I wanted to build a time machine, because that might not lead to consequences that I wanted to have. And so I kept it to myself. And I pretty much did that throughout my whole career because it was my secret project. The thing is that what I realized is that even in college, that I was going to have to do something that was going to relate to it, but not be obvious. And that's where Einstein's work in the theory of black holes came in. And if you look at all of my publications, after I started as faculty member at the University of Connecticut, they're on cosmology and black holes and topics like that. None of them has to do with time travel. And however, Einstein's work, which we'll go into more detail later, but the thing is that it was key to understanding time. So I could understand things like black holes and write papers about it, and that would still allow me to study time. So that's what I built my career on. If I had come to during my interview with UConn, if I had said, well, I'm interested in building a time machine, we wouldn't be having this conversation here. So that's something that I just didn't do. And it wasn't until actually at the turn of the century that I had my breakthrough. And by that time, I was a tenured full professor. And I like to use a really terrible analogy, but being a tenured full professor is very roughly equivalent to being like a made man in the mafia.
They're probably not going to be wild about you using that analogy, but yes, okay.
You're practically bulletproof. And the thing is that by that time, when I made my breakthrough, I didn't have to fear anymore. So I was able to come out of the time travel closet without fear. But once again, since my work was rooted in Einstein's theories of relativity, that provided a sound foundation. So when I published my papers, and I should mention that the papers for physicists, and people don't realize sometimes how the publication process goes in the sciences. But when you submit a paper for publication, it doesn't just automatically get published. It goes to an anonymous referee. And they're anonymous for a reason, because they can be critical without any comeback.
Sure.
And the thing is that the referee judges whether or not it's scientifically sound, mathematically sound, and it can be accepted or rejected. And the thing is that I've had, fortunately for me, many more papers accepted than rejected, but I have had, both things, and that keeps the science at a high level, as a matter of fact. So I knew that when I was writing these papers, the later papers, that they were going to have to be scientifically and mathematically sound. So the critics that I have within the community they're not critical of the physics and mathematics of my work. What they're critical about, and I actually agree with them on many of those points, is the technological feasibility of achieving what I want, which is a different statement from whether or not it's mathematically and sound as far as the physics.
All right, may I for 1 second divert your attention? We'll come right back here. But since you're a theoretical physicist and we haven't talked in all this time, we now have this spooky action at a distance, I believe Einstein called it, quantum entanglement, which is fascinating, impossible stuff. And presumably throughout any distance you would care to name, these things flip and flop together once they've become entangled. Now, there's kind of a new twist in the entanglement world, if you've done reading, and I'm certain you have. It's called a quantum twisting, in which they find that instead of a full flip or a flop, there can be a kind of a partial one with a twist. And the twist in this is that they think that it might be the key to communication at faster than light, in fact, instantaneous communication. So I wonder if you have any comment on all of that, or maybe you can help me understand quantum entanglement's abilities in the first place. I ask everybody, so if you can't, you can't.
Oh, no. I mean, the thing is that it was actually known at the beginning of quantum mechanics. I mean, it's just within the public imagination fairly recently, but it was actually known way back. I mean, when one of the founders of quantum mechanics was a man named Erwin Schrödinger, who came up with the formulation of it back in 1926.
Yes.
And he realized that was an aspect of it. And it's really not so strange as it sounds. I mean, the thing is that in quantum mechanics, systems, if they are created together, they're a unit. And as far as the mathematics of quantum mechanics is concerned, even when you separate them at a spatial distance, they're still entangled because they would dwarf a unit. Okay, that's the important part. It's just not arbitrary, but they had to have been a single unit to begin with. So that's actually, and that's used in some small ways in a lot of electronic devices. But the thing is that it's become much more well known because of the fact that it seems to imply that one has to be careful. We haven't had communication with it yet.
I know.
Location, but it is not the same thing. And when it comes to relativity never said that things can't be faster than the speed of light. What it said is that you can't send information, okay, faster than the speed of light, which is a different thing. And because the universe itself actually can expand faster than the speed of light, that's something that people aren't aware. So, but once again, that hasn't been done in a controlled way. It'll be fascinating if it is, but that's, as I said, it's part of quantum mechanics.
Well, entanglement up until now, and what we knew about it wouldn't allow communication, but with this new quantum twisting they're talking about, they have hopes that might allow communication, which would be really, really, really intriguing. I don't know if any of this has and or bears on your work in any way, and perhaps not. I just wanted to ask you about it, that's all, and get your comments.
Sure. No, not directly. It doesn't have, it doesn't affect my work. My work is actually based on manipulating space and time in a different way. And in fact, the thing that you're talking about actually is not a part of Einstein's general theory.
Right.
It's just part of what is the basis of my work.
It seemed to just sort of annoy Einstein, and so that he called it spooky action distance. Anyway, back to...
Well, I should mention the reason why is because the very foundation of the special theory of relativity was to, in a sense, deal with signals that exceed the good going faster than the speed of light. I mean, you have to realize that the foundation of Einstein's general theory of relativity, it was to solve a problem that was in Newton's theory of gravity. In Newton's theory of gravity, it had predicted, and this was over 300 years ago, that gravity could travel faster than the speed of light. And Einstein developed a general theory of relativity in order to take care of that particular problem. In other words, to make sure that gravity was consistent with the theory of relativity. So this notion of instantaneous action at a distance was actually in physics many, many, many years ago. It's just that quantum mechanics brings it up in a different form, but it actually has been part of the root of other aspects of physics for a very long time.
Okay, let's go back to what you're doing, and you're working with light, and I think you're working with lasers, and I believe that you are building a time machine. Now that's getting way ahead, but I want to let people know that you're not just toying around with ideas, you're building hardware, right?
Well, I should say that we would like to build hardware. I mean, as you pointed out, I'm a theoretical physicist. I mean, and it's really important to distinguish between theoretical and experimental. Of all the various sciences, there is a precise division of labor in physics. Chemists and biologists pretty much go back and forth, but in physics, it really isn't. There is that precise division. And Einstein, for example, was a theoretical physicist, and he came up with the notion of E equals mc squared. What people don't realize is that when Einstein developed that equation, neither he nor anyone else knew. It implied that if you have a small bit of matter, you can create an enormous amount of energy. The question was, technologically, is this possible? And even Einstein wasn't sure whether it would be, technologically possible to do that, even though the equation says that this is a possibility.
Once he figured that out, Professor, do you think that he's sorry that he didn't bury it?
No, not really. I mean, it's much more complex than that. It wasn't that. You have to remember that when he wrote the famous letter to Roosevelt, he very much felt that the German scientists were on the verge of developing an atomic weapon. And for him, he would have had no problem whatsoever with it having been dropped on, the Nazis, in Germany at the time. He just wouldn't have. That's important to keep in mind. When he found out that their project wasn't working, and that when the bomb was dropped on Japan, that's when he felt a bitterness about it.
Yes.
It wasn't about the use of the bomb per se. It was just the target of it. And that is something that caused him a considerable amount of angst.
All right. Professor, just straight out question. Do you believe that time travel is truly possible? Not at this instant, perhaps, but ultimately.
Well, not only do I believe it, but time travel to the future has already been done. I mean, you have to realize that Einstein developed two theories. One was the special theory of relativity, which he developed in 1905. And that theory says that time for a moving clock slows down. The faster you have the clock move, the more time slows down. Now, when I'm talking about a clock, I'm not just talking about a mechanical mechanism. Your heart is a clock.
Yes.
And that would mean that if you were traveling fast enough, your heart rate would slow down. Now, it's important to realize that this doesn't mean that you wouldn't feel it. You would not notice it, no matter how fast you were traveling. It's just like when you're in your car. No matter how fast you're going, you don't feel like you're traveling at high speed. If someone who's watching you sees you zip by. And it's the same thing here. If you're traveling close to the speed of light, they would actually see your heart rate slow down so noticeably that you would not be aging as much as others. And that would mean that if you were traveling fast enough that you could arrive in the future, maybe only being a few hours older, whereas decades could have been passed for everyone else. Now, that actually is a precise prediction of Einstein's theory. The technical name for it is time dilation. Now, what is important to realize is that this has been verified not only on the subatomic level, but even on the large-scale level. There's this device in Switzerland. It's called the Large Hadron Collider.
I think it's at work right now, isn't it?
Well, right now they're staging, they're renovating it to go to turning it back on. But they actually found a particle that they had built the machine for in the first place, and a couple of physicists won a Nobel Prize for it. It's the so-called God particle, which its real name is the Higgs particle. That's what the device was built for.
I think now they're actually theorizing something smaller than Higgs, right?
Well, there has been a long time that people have been talking about other particles. Well, actually, there's been this notion of there's two different types of theories. One of them is called Supersymmetric Theories, in which they say that there are other groups of subatomic particles that are sort of counterparts of the particles that we already know. And then there's superstring theories, which say that we're trying to explore and say that all of our particles are actually vibrations of these strings in many, many dimensions.
Yes, indeed. Professor, may I ask you something, and it concerns CERN. So, just to put everybody's mind at rest, or perhaps not, there are people who theorize that at CERN they may create a black hole. Now, I've heard it said that that black hole would be very minor and would blink out very quickly. Would you say that you're 100% certain that if that black hole is created, there would be no adverse worldwide possible effect?
Yeah. One of the things that's important to realize is that when that sort of thing came out, it was part of the hype to get people interested in the Large Hadron Collider.
Yes.
Seriously. Because the thing is that people were wondering, what is this thing for and how long it's taking, 10 years to build this thing. And it's costing, billions of dollars to do it. And to try to keep those people finite probability, I should say, of black holes being created. Now, you have to realize that this is another aspect of quantum mechanics, and the probability of that was so low that, and let me give you an example of a probability that it's similar to. When the atomic scientists of the Manhattan Project were getting ready to set the bomb off, they actually did some calculations, and there was a finite probability, that our atmosphere has hydrogen in it, that the fission bomb would cause a fusion of the hydrogen in the atmosphere and turn our entire planet into one gigantic hydrogen bomb.
Yes.
That was actually a serious calculation, but the probability, when people talk about probabilities, that is a really, really tricky thing, because it's like the probability, and there is a probability that the room that you're in right now, all of the molecules in the air will end up on the other side of that room, and you will find yourself in a vacuum. And it is a finite probability, but it's so low that it's greater than the age of the universe. So when people talk about probabilities, one has to be careful, and that's so in the case of these black holes that might have formed. The probability of them is just, it's there.
All right, let me rephrase it. Is there a bigger chance that CERN will do something that could affect the whole world than a bigger chance of that than there is of the air leaving half my room?
Pretty much the same.
Really? Well, okay.
Yeah, really, the thing is that there's a probability. When you calculate, and it depends on what it is that you're talking about the probability of. Something strange can happen, but the probability of it is so low that they're not even thinking about it, really. What they're hoping is that when they get the experiments, seriously going again, that they might see evidence for these strings or these, counterpart particles, these supersymmetric particles. That's what they're really, interested in, and they're hoping that they'll be able to get the money and continue to have the money. It costs about $1 billion a year to keep running that thing.
Oh, yeah. Well, when scientists have a choice to either push a button or not push a button,
Right.
I tell you what, we've got a real quick break to do, so hold on, Professor. I'm getting so wrapped up in what I'm doing. We'll be right back.
And again, we're muted because, of course, the audio bumper. We'll be back as soon as they're back.
This is Midnight in the Desert with Art Bell. Please ring Art's bell at 1-952-225-5278. That's 1-952. Art.
Interrupting my own announcement. I'm not saying my music is loud, but I just recently noticed that the water in the bathroom adjacent to me is sending out rings from the center in the sink that are perfectly timed to the bass of the music that I'm running in this room. That tells you how I handle my music here. Now, the other thing is I just about blew a break, and I get so wrapped up in this topic that, that's another effect of time. So totally wrapped up that everything else goes away. I'm listening to the professor and didn't even think about a break coming up. Fortunately, a little whisper in my ear corrected that. Yet another effect of time. What I was saying, Professor, was scientists create, they think about things, they suppose things, which is what a theoretical physicist does, and then other people build things. And then once built, even though there is a possibility of perhaps something going wrong, I don't know, the atmosphere igniting, whatever, they do end up pushing the button. And while that generally works out well, there may come a day when it may not work out as well. You would concede that.
Well, yes, but that's what can happen when you get in your car.
Oh, sure.
I mean, the thing that you have to realize is that, anytime we're dealing with, the mechanics of nature, something can potentially go wrong. I mean, we've seen that with space flight and NASA.
Oh, yes.
So it's the question is that what is the likelihood? And, when you get in your car, you think that it's pretty much going to go, but it's actually, it's much more likely that something's going to go wrong with your car than something's going to go wrong in the Large Hadron Collider. That's the real science of it, because the precautions that they take as far as safety precautions are concerned. But now you're talking about, phenomena that unexpected phenomena that can occur.
That's right.
That's something else again, because we're being bombarded by cosmic rays. And these cosmic rays, some of them have energies that are absolutely incredible, and they could be raining down things that we don't even see in the particle accelerators yet. So they could be causing strange phenomena that we don't even quite understand yet because of that. So it's these machines allow us to have so much more control of what it is that we're dealing with. And but what's happening out in nature is something else again. And that's one of the things that makes science the exciting thing that it is.
Listen, I'm on your side. I'm a button pusher. I'm just sort of thinking ahead here that one day, as we push limits, we could get an unintended consequence. That's all.
Oh, that's very, very possible, but that's always so. I mean, you have to remember there was a time before radio and television.
No, not before radio. I said, no, not before radio.
Oh, right. And the thing is that it's already has unintended consequences. I mean, this is part of the way in which when we try to control nature, that this is part of what happens, but it doesn't mean that we stop exploring. In fact,
that's right. I consider many things on television to be unintended consequences. Reality TV. There's.
Yeah, I have to agree with you about that.
All right. Look, I would like to get to your breakthrough. You had a breakthrough. What exactly was it?
Well, the thing is that in order to talk about the breakthrough, I have to back up.
Okay.
And go into, what is the foundation of the breakthrough.
All right.
Otherwise, the breakthrough itself won't make a lot of sense.
All right.
And once again, I'll go back to, because you asked me earlier about the possibility of time travel itself, and I was mentioning the special theory of relativity.
Yes.
It says time slows down to a moving clock. And I was mentioning the Large Hadron Collider, and the fact that what we know is that this effect really does happen, because subatomic particles, there are some of them that disintegrate after just a fraction of a second, millionth of a second. And you might say that they have an internal clock that says, well, after so much time, boom, they're going to just simply disappear. And what happens is that when we accelerate them in something like the Large Hadron Collider, we can make these particles go close to the speed of light. And what we've been able to find is that we can make them live 20, 30, 40 times longer than they normally would. In effect, what we've done is send these particles into the future. And we've actually been able to do this on a human scale, but at a much smaller rate. There was an experiment that was done in 1971 at the Naval Observatory, U.S. Naval Observatory, which they took two atomic clocks. One was kept at rest at the Naval Observatory. The other was put on an ordinary passenger jet and flown around the world. When they brought it back, they found that the atomic clock on the passenger jet had actually slowed down. It had lost time in exactly the way Einstein predicted in the special theory of relativity. This means that this plane actually flew into the future, but by just fractions of a second, because even though it was traveling at the speed of sound, that's very, very slow compared to the speed of light. And when we have planes and rockets, or when we have rockets, rather, that can go NASA does work on some of these ones. They have exotic names like Ion Engine. Then we will eventually have the effect that when astronauts go out in space, if they're traveling close to the speed of light and come back, only a few years may have passed for those astronauts, but they could have arrived, decades into the far future, that travel. And in fact, there was a movie, one of the science fiction movies that's one of my favorites that got it right. It was the original Planet of the Apes with Charlton Heston. They thought they had landed on another planet that was ruled by apes. What had happened is that what they realized later is that they had been traveling so close to the speed of light that that they had actually landed back on the Earth in the distant future. But they didn't realize that because things, they thought they were in this weird planet. So that effect is travel to the future. We actually have already been able to do that. As I said, until on a human scale, it's going to be a while till we can do it, but we can do it. It's time travel to the past that I was interested in, and you can't do that from the special theory of relativity. So once again, the special theory of relativity says that time for a moving clock slows down, and that allows for time travel into the future, which we already have achieved, just not on a dramatic scale. Now, time travel into the past, how does that happen? Well, Einstein's general theory of relativity does not have to do with speed. What Einstein's general theory of relativity says is that time is affected by gravity. And that's part of the key of my work, because what Einstein meant by that was that the stronger gravity is, the more time slows down. That means a clock here at the surface of the Earth, where gravity is stronger, is actually ticking slower than a clock at high altitude. And that's important to realize that. And we actually know that effect is real. As a matter of fact, our GPS system works because of Einstein's theory of
All right, if
gravity.
I'm following what you're saying, would that suggest that with enough gravity, you could slow time dramatically and
Right.
essentially go into the past?
No, into the future.
Into
Because
the
you're
future.
still just slowing, right? You're just slowing time down, okay? It's the effect of slowing time down is what allows you to go into the future.
Okay, well that then does not get you into the past.
No, but the point is that what it says is that you can actually, in this, I don't have enough time to go into it, but what this is associated with is the fact that in Einstein's theory, gravity, the force that we call gravity, is actually not a force at all. It's actually a bending of empty space. The sun, for example, bends the empty space around it. The analogy I like to use is if you think of space as being like a rubber sheet, like a small trampoline, and if you put a bowling ball on it, you can get the rubber sheet to bend.
Okay.
If you take a marble, and you can actually put the marble in it, it'll go towards the bowling ball. But if you make the rubber sheet transparent, it would appear to you as though somehow the bowling ball is pulling directly on the marble, but it's not. That's actually rubber sheet. And that's what Einstein said that gravity is. The sun is actually bending the empty space around it, and the Earth is just moving in that. In fact, you can actually do that with the rubber sheet, with the marble. If you take a marble and sort of give it a sideways motion, it'll actually orbit around the bowling ball like a skater on the roller derby ring. And what the Earth, fortunately for us, when the solar system was formed, the Earth had this sort of a sideways motion, and so it's moving around and around the warp space. Now, in Einstein's theory, space and time are connected to each other. Whatever you do to space happens to time. So this bending of space actually leads to a bending of time. You might say, well, what does that mean? The bending of time shows up to us as clocks ticking slower. So gravity is a bending of space and time. But if you can bend space, then you can actually maybe finally twist it. In fact, if you have a rotating star will not just simply bend space, it will actually twist space. And it turns out that if you have an object like a rotating black hole, not only will it bend space and twist space, but it will also twist time. And it's that twisting of time that gives you the you could twist time into a loop, then you could go from the past, present, to the future.
Are you referring to something like a pulsar?
A pulsar is not a rotating black hole. Pulsar would cause some twisting of space and time, but not dramatic enough. A rotating black hole is a much, much more dense object, and it would actually cause a twisting of space and time. Pulsar is actually a neutron star, which is a state that's a little bit before you get to a black hole state. So, but we do know that there are rotating black holes out there in space. We just haven't got, we can get to them. But the thing is that if we could, since you have this twisting of time into a loop, as I said, along this loop, you could go from the past, present, to the future, but you've made time into a loop, so you could go from the future back into the past. So Einstein's general theory of relativity allows for the possibility of bending time and twisting time. And it's this twisting of time that's part of the core of my work. And so once again, what I realized in Einstein's theory, Newton's theory, the only thing that can create gravity is matter, okay? And that's it. In Einstein's theory, not only can matter create gravity, but light can create gravity as well. Even though light does not have mass or matter, but light has energy, and the energy of light can actually create gravity. And that was the core of my breakthrough, because I realized that in Einstein's theory, since gravity can affect time and light can create gravity, then light can affect time. That was the core of my breakthrough. And what I realized was that I could do something similar to what one has with a rotating black hole by using a device called a ring laser. A ring laser is just simply a device that creates a circulating beam of light. One way of thinking about it is that if you have a series of mirrors that form like a square, and you bounce light off of one mirror and hits the other mirror and the other, and it creates a circulating beam of light. That circulating beam of light can cause a twisting of space. And the analogy that I like to give people to think about that is the fact that think of if you had a cup of coffee in front of you right now.
I do.
Think of the coffee as being like empty space. And think of the spoon as being like the circulating light beam. So what happens when you take the spoon and stir the coffee? The coffee starts swirling around, so it creates a vortex in the coffee.
Mm-hmm.
That, what will happen in empty space is the circulating light beam will actually cause empty space to get swirled around. You'll actually be able to create sort of vortex in empty space. Now, you might say, well, if it's empty space, how do I see it? Well, let's come back to the coffee. If I throw a coffee bean in there, then what will happen is that as I'm stirring the coffee will drag the coffee bean around. So I could see the effect of the spoon stirring the coffee by seeing the coffee dragging the coffee bean around. The thing that plays the role of the coffee bean in the experiment that we're talking about would be a particle called the neutron, which is part of every atom. If you put a neutron into the empty space and then turn on the circulating light beam, as the circulating light beam is twisting the space will drag the neutron around, just like the coffee dragged the coffee bean around. So even though you can't see the space itself being dragged around, what you'll be able to see all of a sudden is the neutron will start getting twisted around when you turn on the circulating light beam. So that would tell you that space is actually being twisted. And now we go to the next step, because remember I said that space and time are connected in Einstein's theory.
Yes.
So if you cause this twisting in space to become strong enough, then the straight line of time going from the past, present, to the future will actually get twisted into a loop, so that you'll be able to travel from the past, present, to the future. But once again, you've twisted time into a loop, so you can go from the future back into the past. Mm-hmm. And that's my idea, and that's my work. Now, of course, everything that I described to you has been in words. I should mention that for physicists, that is not even remotely enough. What you have to do whenever you have these things, when physicists say that they have a theoretical model, people sometimes think that means, something that they're talking about verbally. not that at all. What I had to do was to solve Einstein's gravitational field equations and for a circulating beam of light. And then what I found was I found mathematical result that showed that space and time could be twisted. So that is what I actually had to submit as far as a paper was a mathematical model. I have to emphasize that because once again I have people saying, oh gee, that's something that you could have thought of. Well, actually, once it's out there, then yeah, it seems clear. But you have to actually develop a mathematical model to actually show this in order for it to mean something to physicists.
I understand. Have you worked on any practical application that would demonstrate the theory?
Well, the practical application was showing that you could twist space. Now, that's a possibility. That could be a new type of space propulsion, for example. Imagine if you could use light to manipulate space, then you can manipulate objects in space, and that might lead to a whole new type of space travel. So that's one of the things that we've been thinking about. But the main thing is to actually do the experiments itself. And once again, this is where the public gets a lot of their ideas about these things from science fiction movies. One of my favorite movies is Back to the Future. In real science, and once again, we were talking about the Large Hadron Collider, the prediction of that was the Higgs particle was over 40 years ago, and it took 10 years to build this Large Hadron Collider at a cost of $10 billion, and all of that was just to smash particles together to see if they would give you the Higgs particle. I mean, that sounds simple, that you smash particles together, they get enough energy that it might create this Higgs particle.
Actually, Professor, I'd heard that even though they claim to have found the Higgs particle, they haven't actually seen it. In other words, it had to be identified by its absence in a littered group of particles. I mean, that's not a good explanation, but that's what I read.
Oh, no. The thing is that many experiments, you're not seeing the particle directly. What you're seeing is the decay products.
Where it was.
Right. I mean, you're seeing things. What's done is the prediction is that this particle will actually disintegrate and give you other things. And so you don't have to see the particle directly.
Right.
What you have to see is those other things, and that's just the same thing as seeing it. So that's just part of the normal process of it. But in any case, this thing costs $10 billion, and just for the funding that we're looking at for just the feasibility study, and the feasibility study wouldn't be to show time travel. What it would be is the first show that you could use circulating light to twist space, which is a whole new effect in itself, which, as I said, could lead to a possibility of a new type of space propulsion. But just the feasibility study for that, and by that means computer modeling, looking at laser arrays. And I should mention that I have an experimental partner. He's a laser physicist. He's not a specialist in relativity, but he's a laser physicist. His name is Chandra Chowdhury.
Yes.
And he's a research professor at UConn. And he became interested in my work and in experimentally verifying my work. But just to do the feasibility study is going to cost $250,000. And that may sound like a lot, but it's actually, minor when it comes to scientific experiments. And what we're looking at is trying to get the funding just to do that. And what happens is that people are dismayed because they think that, well, this is going to lead immediately to a time machine. It's not. That's not the way real science happens.
Well, that would not dismay me. I would be very excited about that. I would love to see that happen. And I should add that since we're talking dollars here, yes, $1 billion is a lot of money. But I just read an article indicating the United States plans to spend $1 trillion on updating our nuclear arms. So it's all relative, if you'll excuse.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, so the thing is that, but that's the stage that we're in right now, is trying to get the funding for showing that the feasibility study for showing that circulating light will cause a twisting of space. If we see that, then this will allow us to go and do the experiment itself, and that experiment will probably cost many millions of dollars more, but we won't know how much more until we do the feasibility study. Then, if the experiments can twist space by using light, then the input from that we would use to see what would be necessary to cause the twisting of time. And that is going to be caused even more millions of dollars, and that's down the line. So we're talking about something that's going to happen over a long period of time, and this is the way in which science progresses. And that's okay. I mean, the thing is that even with planes, with flight, one of the things I've always been surprised about is that most of the documentaries that I've seen about the Wright brothers, they do a good job of talking about their background and everything as bicycle mechanics, and then they talk about, flying the plane at Kitty Hawk. I've only seen one documentary that mentions in detail the fact that these two brothers actually did science and engineering things prior to that. What they did was build a small wind tunnel to look at wing configurations. That's very practical engineering. That's what they did in order to get the correct, flight characteristics that were necessary. And what I'm doing is to sort of like the wind tunnel stage. What I'm trying to get the funding for is to show the twisting of space is like doing that. And then from that will allow us to see what it is that we need for the twisting of time. So the theory is there, and and as I said, I actually have a experimental partner that's interested in it. And I'm trying to get people who are experts in neutrons to become interested in that part of it, because that, as I said, has applications that are independent of time travel, just simply a new prediction about how circulating light can cause a twisting of space.
Yes, Professor, if you were able to do that, would it be easier to attempt to send information through before anything else?
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's the only thing we're interested in. I mean, I'm not interested at all in sending people through time. And,
why not?
well, number one, it doesn't serve any purpose, and it's actually, we call ourselves the information age. Sending a person back is like, that sounds romantic, but sending information back is vastly more important than sending a person back. I mean, sending a person back as I said, that's fun for us. But being able to send information back, and we were talking about that earlier, is about warning or sending information back about cures and things like that. I mean, this is actually much more important. Eventually, it would be nice to send people back, but the amount of energy that would be required for that would require the total capability and collaboration. I mean, CERN is an international collaboration.
Yes.
It would require something like a super CERN type of thing. I mean, it would require the output of the financial cooperation of all the major world governments. And once again, that answers that's because of the fact of the energies that we're talking about.
Yes.
If you're sending information, that's not much energy. If you're talking,
No, I was just contemplating the cooperation of all the world's governments.
Oh yeah, that's
right on the chuckle.
But still, all you have to do is think about the CERN. CERN is the cooperation between the United, it's Switzerland, Germany, France, in the United States. So it is possible if they feel like they want to do it.
Okay, Professor, just for fun, let us imagine that you get the twisting you want, that you can pass information into the past, and that you decide to pass, just as an example, information on how to cure a disease that we now know how to cure, thereby saving the lives of millions of people in the past.
Right.
Now, that one act could have paradox implications that are staggering to even think about.
Well, that's the reason why I said that time travel to the past is a much more complicated and subtle thing than time travel to the future. There are no paradoxes with time travel to the future. But when you're talking about time travel to the past, it brings up the specter of what we call the grandfather paradox, which has very, very many forms. But the most basic of it is if you go back to prevent your grandparents from meeting each other, then they don't have your parents. And if they don't have your parents, then your parents don't have you. talking about mainly, except when we were talking about entanglement, has been relativity. Quantum mechanics, there's two pillars of modern physics. One is relativity, the other is quantum mechanics. And when you bring quantum mechanics into the mix, you actually have a whole different thing happening. And let me clarify that. Back in 1957, there was a physicist at Princeton named Hugh Everett III, and he was looking at what happens if you apply quantum mechanics to the universe as a whole rather than just to simple systems. And when he developed the mathematical theory behind that, he found that it led to a rather startling conclusion, and that is to say that whatever outcome can happen, that outcome and its opposite or adjacent would happen. For example, if I'm talking about, and I'll use a simple scale, a large-scale analogy.
I'm sorry, Professor, before you get into that, we're right up against a break, so hold that thought. We'll come back to it following the break. Grab some coffee. I know in Connecticut it's getting really late. Professor Ronald Mallett is my guest. Time travel is the subject. Midnight in the Desert is the show. I'm Art Bell.
And with that, we will leave Midnight in the Desert for tonight. We will pick it up again tomorrow for part 2. Send a gift to the old guildmate, as we're with the new guildmate. And the new guild is actually at a lower tree level, which is actually an interesting little economy, but they are Silver League, so we will get better silver medals now for that. And with that, we're going to go ahead and leave the day. When we come back for part 1 tomorrow, we're going to take a look at Asgard, as we have that unlocked at level 65. But until then, make sure you like, share, and subscribe. Get us to those goals of 5,000 views, 1,000 subscribers, so Boxy will pay attention to us. And remember, release the Kraken.